Welcome to Season 2 of the Face to Face Ministries podcast. I am Melinda Wilson.
And I'm Kathy Little. Thank you so much for joining us as we introduce you to ministries and leaders from around the globe who have said yes to the Isaiah 61 mandate to heal the brokenhearted and set the captives free, helping people to step into who they were always meant to be.
And for more information about us, please visit our website, face2faceministries.org. That's all one word, no spaces, no numbers, and no caps. And please follow us on our social media platforms, face2faceministries.org on Facebook and on Instagram, face2facemin.
Welcome to today's episode. We are so happy you're here. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 75.
Welcome. We're so glad that you're here. I would like to mix up. So listen, guys, if you have a suggestion for how we can say welcome to the podcast and a number, just tell us. Should we sing it? Should we do it in a different language? I would like to really know suggestions. That's a good idea, actually, Kathy. Let's see. I can't remember my Spanish days, but say
no
it in
idea.
a different language. We're so glad that you're here for episode 75, though.
Yeah, welcome. And we only have 24 more episodes before we hit 100, so we should probably starting to think about ways we could creatively do episode 100. But it's coming very quickly.
Yes.
But hey, thanks for joining us, you guys. And just real quickly, want to remind you guys that we've launched the Heart Healing Network, and it is off of Facebook because everybody is getting a little frustrated with Facebook right now, but it is a network all to itself, a community of people that are going after deeper intimacy with Jesus and healed hearts. We're raising up an army of heart healers with healed hearts because, as you learn how to help others, you get healing for yourself, and it has to start with you because you can't go where you haven't been. And if you want information on that, you can go to our homepage and look for Heart Healing Network. It's right there at the top. And you can just go to face2faceministries.org for that. It's a free network. Just come on along. We'd love to have you be part of that. We got some real cool stuff going on in there.
And inside that network, you're going to meet new friends. We're building community, as well as our 4-part Introduction to a Manual Approach training.
Yes, this is available.
Really, not just because I taught it, but it's really valuable. It's a really kind of a flyover of the Emmanuel approach, but there are some really amazing, I take you through, a lot of you have experienced that. I take you through an Emmanuel moment on all of them, but also it'll give you tools to help other people to connect with Jesus and also to stay in peace and joy. It's only $20 inside the Heart Healing Network, and you can go through it with friends or by yourself. And I promise you'll be able to experience connection with Jesus as you do this because it's proven brain science tools. Yeah. So go in there and check out the Heart Healing Network, check out the Emmanuel approach, and we'll look forward to seeing you in there. And it's been really cool because we've gotten to meet some of you that have listened to the podcast, and then you join the Heart Healing Network, and then we're putting names to faces and I've been listening to your podcast and thank you so much. It's such a joy and an honor and humbling to meet all of you or some of you who have been listening to the podcast, and then we get to connect with you relationally. It really is super cool and really fun, and we're building relationship with each other. So come on in.
Yeah, we're both really relational. The podcast thing is kind of difficult for us because we're not being relational in it. So we do the best we can. But this is an opportunity for us to actually connect and meet you. But we're very excited with our conversation today with a woman named Betsy Stalcup. Melinda, why don't you tell them just a little background? I know we had her share her story as well, but your connection, and she's doing some good stuff, y'all.
Yeah, just really quick. She's up in Northern Virginia, and she is the director of Healing Center International, and their whole goal is to, and I talk about this in the podcast, but it's to make joyful relationships in Christ a reality. And they're building community. They're training leaders in healing, and it's really exciting. She'll give more information, but we had a wonderful conversation with her. And as I shared in the podcast, we could have gone on for hours more because it's kind of like when, hot enthusiasts for let's say dirt biking get together, or guitar players get together. They talk about their gear. They talk about what they're passionate about. It's the same with heart healing. We could have talked for hours, but I think you're really going to enjoy our conversation with her. And then you can find out more about her resources as well. But without any further rambling on my part, we will introduce Betsy Stalcup. We are honored today to be with Betsy Stalcup, and she is the Executive Director of Healing Center International in Virginia. Am I correct, Betsy?
Mm-hmm.
It's Virginia. Mm-hmm. And I love your goal, I saw on your website, to make joyful relationships in Christ a reality. And we're going to really unpack that today with Betsy. But Betsy, welcome to the podcast. We're so glad that you're here with us today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. It's great to be here with both of you.
Yeah, we're excited. And definitely you're doing some really important work, and you have been for a long time. And just as we were chatting before the record button got pushed, you were starting to share with us some of your history and your background and your education and what your main life experience has been up until this point, and then God moving you into this field. So I'd love for you to share that with our audience, just a little bit about who you are and where your education was and where you spent all that time and what you've done before this, because it's kind of an interesting journey. I did not expect it when you said that your PhD was in the field that it is. So introduce us to you.
Okay, so I can start by talking about my education. So I got a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a PhD in geology or earth science, and worked for 17 years for the U.S. Geological Survey up in Alaska, working on extinct volcanoes. And that was a career that I really loved. I would go up to Alaska every summer, fly around in a helicopter, have to carry a rifle to ward off the bears. And I'm pretty adventuresome, so that was a lot of fun. And I always thought that I would continue to do that. But at some point, my husband needed to move back to the East Coast. We were in California at the time. And so I moved. I was able to be transferred, but I was the only person in my branch, in my group, in the Alaska group, that was in Reston. And Reston then later on needed to cut some people, and they cut me. And I told my boss at Anchorage they're going to cut me. And he was like, no, you just got promoted. I don't think they will. And I said, well, you don't understand what's going on here. And sure enough, they did cut me. But I believe, looking back, that it was from the Lord, because when I went to him and prayed about it, I felt like he told me to lay it on the altar. And it was very hard to do because I loved my work. But my children also were starting to really struggle. It was hard on them to have their mom gone. And not just gone, but I was in remote areas of Alaska where there was no way to contact me. So it was as if I ceased to exist from the point of view of their little minds. So that was my background. And then when I left the U.S. Geological Survey, I was home with my 3 children who have a pretty big age range. They're each 5 years apart, so 10 years between the oldest and the youngest. I was home with them, and I began teaching science in a local Christian high school that needed a science teacher pretty desperately. And it was while I was teaching there that I literally heard the Lord call me very clearly that he wanted me to start a healing center in my church. And I didn't really even know what that meant or what he meant. But I just started moving forward with the little bit that I knew. And that was 17 years ago.
Wow.
Well, when he said healing center, what did that even mean to you? Because healing can have all sorts of, connotations in your mind. Like, I'm going to heal people of, a broken leg or a broken heart, or what does that even mean? And to some people, healing can even have a negative connotation, like, well, only Jesus heals. What do you mean about a healing center? So how did that land in your heart and mind? And what did you understand God to even mean by that?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, I was fairly familiar with Christian healing at the time. I think I was introduced in our church in California while I was a graduate student at Stanford. And so I was pretty involved, drinking from all the different wells, and we were doing emotional healing, physical healing, we were following like Bill Johnson and Bethel and Randy Clark. So I was pretty familiar with that. And then when we moved back to Virginia, which is where my husband's from, we went to a charismatic Anglican church that was also doing a lot with healing. And the funny thing was, in my churches, there were a lot of different healing ministries, but they didn't seem very connected. In fact, I almost hate to say this, but there was some sense of competition. Like occasionally you'd go to the person who was doing Theophostic and they would say, well, if you come to me first, instead of seeing the way I believe the Lord wanted to see it, was that everybody is bringing something to the table and it's all of value. Right. And it's all worthwhile. And so when he said healing center, I felt really strongly that my church had always been a center of healing. And my sense was that God wanted me to bring all the different healing ministries together to interact with each other. And so that was the way we began. I sent invitations to the different leaders, and they probably thought, who is this person we've never even heard of, who's inviting us to come meet with her? And we just started meeting, and they would explain their method and what they were doing. And I was encouraging them to attend each other's trainings to actually become familiar and to start referring people to different people within the church. And I had a young priest who was doing pastoral care, and I connected with him, and we wrote a proposal for planting a healing center at our church, Church of the Apostles. And I remember when we met with our rector, and his wife was extremely gifted in healing, both physical and emotional, spiritual. She's an amazing person, Margie Harper. What he said to me is Church of the Apostles has always had healing ministries, but we've been more the ambulance at the base of the cliff. You know, like we catch people when they're like in crisis. And what you're talking about is something that would be more proactive, that would give people life skills and a connection to God that would keep them from becoming in need of an ambulance. In other words, they would know what to do in order to receive healing from God and beginning to walk in that. So I felt like he summed it up really well. And that was what we started doing. We started actually by teaching people how to listen. I know that seems very basic, but it's an absolutely vital skill. And I find even to be a good prayer minister, you need to learn how to listen well. Exactly. And I had taken a class in California called Equipping Ministries International called Listening for Heaven's Sake. So we started teaching that. And then we moved into Theophostic. And then I had an intern one year who taught me about the life model. We started running all of the life model classes. I started teaching people how to process their grief, because when they would come up for prayer, we would have a time during communion at the end of the service when people could come up for prayer. They would come up for prayer and they would want prayer for their knee or their elbow. And I would pray for their knee and elbow, but I would sense God saying, are you just going to let them go with that? Are you going to not do something about that? And I would be like, I don't want to say anything. But the truth was I was seeing grief all over the place. It seemed so many people were holding in grief. And I would pray and ask the Lord to release the grief, and they would start sobbing. Lots of times they would, hang on to me literally and just be crying. I would cry with them. Yeah. It was a pretty powerful experience to see people being set free from their grief. So what we did was we were using all of these different modalities, but we also were developing our own where we saw a whole. And that was 2003. That was when we started.
Wow. What did you find? And I love what you're saying, because Kathy and I are both saying, yeah. This is what we're doing too, totally. As far as bringing all the voices to the table. And what did you find to be challenging in bringing, or was there a challenge in bringing all of these voices to the table?
There were a lot of challenges. I think anyone who is called by God into ministry needs to expect that there's going to be resistance. I think some of the resistance initially were different leaders in the church who, didn't really like what we were doing. People who would say things that the Healing Center was taking over the church, that kind of thing. That for me at the time was really painful, because we weren't trying to take over the church, but we also felt like we're all broken and that everyone could be a better person, could know God more intimately if they would be willing to receive healing in whatever area they're broken. So it was painful, and there were many times when I wanted to quit, but the Lord would tell me, I have not released you from this call. So it kept getting bigger, and it started to draw a lot of people from outside the church, including pastors, and we were doing theophostic sessions by appointment, and the appointment openings would be posted around the first of the month, and the church secretary was getting absolutely inundated with people calling, and like by the second day of the month or the third day of the month, all the appointments for the month would be booked. And so in the very nicest possible way, we were invited to leave.
Wow.
Because we were taking over so much of the church's resources, their space, their staff. It was really hard, but for some time I had felt like the Lord had been preparing me. And so in 2013, we formed a nonprofit. So we're a nonprofit now. There is still a healing center at that original church that's run by someone who took over that job from me. And they're still very engaged with us. But there have been some different seasons we've gone through that have been hard. Like initially, we were mostly teaching classes. Then we started teaching classes and doing prayer ministry. And at some point in there, the Lord told me to stop teaching classes. And we had just started like a semester. And I remember being really upset about it. But I was actually grieving a pretty substantial loss. And my coach said, you really need to step back for a while and let yourself grieve that. And I was like, no. But then she said, well, let's pray about it. And when we prayed, the Lord showed me who I should ask to take over my classes. And the people I asked all said yes. So I rarely teach classes anymore. And he told me instead to focus on the leaders. And so what I started doing was holding leadership development groups for the people who were teaching the classes. And then we started attracting a lot of people who have other ministries. And so now we have about 90 people in leadership development that meets monthly. And it has two purposes. One is to form community. So we just had one this morning where we spent an hour sharing our highs and lows with each other and then praying for each other. And then the second hour, they're actually working on learning their listening skills. We've gone full circle, and we're teaching everyone listening skills again. So the second hour is a skill. So we spent a whole year last year with all the leaders teaching them how to do a manual well. And we have a 4-year curriculum that covers a lot of ground, everything from physical healing to life model to, introducing a little bit about heart sync, because a lot of us are doing heart sync as well. There's just, it's a lot of ground. So I mostly focus on the leaders now, and then I'm writing. So I'm writing things like Facing Life's Losses. I just recently finished a book about miracles, written just to encourage the body of Christ during this difficult season. So God keeps telling me to do different things. And recently he told me, I want you to finish all these books. And so I'm not doing prayer ministry, and I absolutely love doing prayer ministry. But I would probably never finish the books if I was doing prayer ministry. So it's all, for me, it's all about having this relational connection with people. And I love it when I hear about our leaders, like someone in Virginia going down to see someone in North Carolina and doing something fun for the weekend. They're all like starting to connect with each other. The goal is that every leader would have a group of 3, that someone they can turn to share life with, their highs and lows, their joys and sorrows.
I would imagine as a prayer minister and as leaders that you're really focusing on pouring into them. I know for us, it's really vital to be in connection, relationship, have healthy connections with other people who are in the same role and carrying the same calling and walking out the same road. And it's very life-giving when you have that to share, because obviously when you're involved in healing ministry, you're pouring out so much. And I don't think people realize the cost to really be pouring into and carrying, that secondhand trauma that we often are exposed to because we're hearing other people's things. And we're called to do that. It's a grace that we carry, but how valuable to have other people who know that road to be able to encourage each other and to support each other and to bless each other and to be able to walk arm in arm together to do this, because I would never want to be doing this alone. We do this together as a team, but even so, we are connected to others who are doing the same thing. And there's something really powerful about that. And bringing unity to all of those voices. I mean, that's what God put on us to do with the podcast. That's what we've been building. Season 1 specifically focused on the pioneers and founders, directors of the main models. But it's so vital. I believe there's something really significant that God wants to do, bringing unity, because the need is great enough for all of us. I mean, we need everybody activated. And that's why we want to raise up an army of heart healers with healed hearts to be able to meet the need, because my goodness, talk about grief and loss and all of that. This year that's the theme,
Yeah, I agree. I don't think I fully recognized how important community is. And now that we have a pretty robust community and I see them interacting with each other and I see them helping us. So when Sam was sick, I could not believe the level of support that we got. And we have pretty strict guidelines about how we interact with each other that I think are absolutely vital. And I would interact with people from our community. Let's say we were up at Johns Hopkins for 2 months, living up there while Sam had a bone marrow transplant. And I would interact with people from our community, and it would be so life-giving because they would listen well and they would attune well and they were empathetic and they didn't try to fix me. And then I would interact with someone outside that community. Let's say, I don't want to name any names, so let's say a relative who started telling me, what I should do. It was like, oh my goodness. It just was like night and day. And it made us really appreciative of the community that we had. And I don't think you can form it quickly. I think it takes time for people to get this, they need a certain level of life skills so that it is safe for everyone. And they also need to bond and spend time together, not just doing hard things, but doing fun things. But I would agree. I mean, especially in the early years, it seemed like all the leaders we ran into were on the verge of burnout. And they would come into our, community meetings and they would just say, oh, this is so joyful. This is so life-giving. You guys have so much capacity. How did you get here? Well, we got there, one step at a time, teaching people how to turn to the Lord and each other. And the other thing is learning about overwhelm, which we learned from, Ed Curry and Jim Wilder, learning to not overwhelm each other. So one of our key things is all sharing is timed so that you don't go on and overwhelm everybody in the room.
Yeah. And Nick, I've been leading Journey Group with Deeper Walk for a couple of years. And that was one of the main things and even watching people's faces, and that's a challenge, Betsy, obviously, that you've faced in this time where all of this community stuff is ideally done face-to-face in person, where I can put my hand on your shoulder, where we're actually making eye contact. And there's something about the physical presence, obviously, that far out. I miss all that. But we're trying to do it the best we can in virtually, but even watching people's faces, when I'm leading it's not an issue in my group because we've been together for a couple of years, but in the early time when I would have a new person coming in, sharing their story, and I would watch other people's faces as this one person is like, this is the worst time of my life and I'm just in deep and people are like, oh, yeah, they're either like, or they check out.
Yeah.
And so it's learning how it's like teaching people the skills to not overwhelm each other, but also as a leader, needing to navigate through that and helping kind of guide people. And I think all those skills, I just wish, like life model skills and Deeper Walk, I wish that all of that content was taught in every church across the world. Because could learn how to attune with one another, how not to overwhelm, how to be with each other joyfully, how to connect in a healthy way, I think the earth, as a church, I think we could, you know, we need to be healed in order to heal, or at least be on a healing journey ourselves. And we talk about this all the time because if you're sharing something with me and it's touching something and I'm totally triggered and I'm overwhelmed by what you're telling me, then I'm not going to be able to help you at all. I'm going to be sitting in my own mess going, oh my gosh, you just said that and I'm still. And then, you know, you have two kind of broken people there trying to navigate. But I wanted to actually dive a little more deep into just healing, because this is what we're all about. It's what you're all about, Betsy. And there's two things, and you can answer them however you want to. And I know both are probably huge, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into your own healing journey, first of all. And I also want to talk about, maybe you could be thinking about that while you're sharing this. I also wanted to ask you, what are some myths that you have found that people believe about heart healing? Some myths or maybe lies they believe about heart healing that keep them from actually entering into a heart healing journey. So however you want to answer those two, but definitely want to hear, because, you know, we went from you being a geologist to now you're opening a healing center. There's got to be some more in between there, Betsy.
So fill in the blanks.
Yeah, well, oh gosh, it's such a long story. You'll have to signal me if I go too long. But basically, I grew up in a really wounded, dysfunctional family where my dad was had pretty bad mood swings. You know, he wouldn't ever go to a doctor, so he was never diagnosed as anything. But I suspect he was bipolar or something. He was very volatile and a very codependent, loving mother. And we were just really messed up. And I think my sister has mentioned to me recently that it was my perception that I was kind of the whipping kid, but she has also mentioned to me that it was painful for her as a child to watch, you know, what happened to me. So I was the one who was accused of like setting dad off. But my perception was I could feel him start to ramp up. And it was absolutely terrifying because I knew he was going to come after me and I'd start to cry. I cried pretty easily. And he would then go after me. But the family would say, you set him off. Why did you cry? If you hadn't cried, you know, you wouldn't set him off. So it was a very wounding situation. But when I was 10, a girlfriend invited me to come to Sunday school and I went with her. And they were so welcoming and seemed to actually want me around, which was pretty foreign experience for me. And so I just kept coming back. And then my sister had gone with me, my older sister, and then finally mom and the other three kids started coming as well. It was a Baptist church, so I learned a lot to memorize a lot of scripture. And about a year after I started coming, when I understood some of the vocabulary, I mean, you think about it, there's a whole new vocabulary that was all completely foreign to me. My little Sunday school teacher led me to give my life to the Lord. And that was really the beginning. But the church I was in was extremely judgmental. And I was not up to their standards. And I would pretty regularly go forward again for the altar call, you know, crying. And it was like, there she goes again. I never really felt like I got really saved, you know, saved with a capital S. So I went off to college. I basically escaped. I mean, my father told me you're not going, and I went anyway. My mom helped me pack, and off I went when he was at work. So, I was a smart little kid, so I had a scholarship. And then there, I totally turned my back on any kind of faith. And I ended up moving in during the beginning of my sophomore year with a man who was 10 years older than I was. So I was 18, and he was 28. And I lived with this guy until I went off to Norway for a junior year abroad. And in Norway, I lived with a different man, also a lot older than me, never making the connection that I was trying to like heal the relationship with my dad, you know, by being with someone older. But it was while I was living in Norway that I actually, it was kind of crazy looking back on it. My live-in boyfriend went through sort of a spiritual crisis. and started crying and saying, what's the meaning in life? And when he said that, I became like little Miss Preacher. It was the strangest experience because somewhere from deep within me came up all this stuff that I didn't even think I believed anymore. And I ended up coming back to the Lord. And I moved back to California and into a group home with a Christian family who were incredibly godly people. We're still friends. And I lived there for 3 years. It was a very healing experience living there, going to church, getting involved with the campus fellowship. That was my bachelor's and my master's. But I still had a lot of wounds. I started a tendency to get in unhealthy relationships. And I got accepted into the PhD program at Stanford. And I had been working at the U.S. Geological Survey at that point for about a year. And I got pregnant out of wedlock while I was up in Alaska one summer. And it was like it was a huge crisis because I couldn't imagine having an abortion. I mean, I couldn't imagine anything. I felt like there were no roads. But a friend of mine took me to a very prophetic woman up in Alaska who told me that I should stay in school, and the first thought I had is, I'm not going to Stanford. This will never happen. And I literally just kind of found my way forward one day at a time and became very serious about my faith in God and about pursuing healing. And that was really where it all began. And that little girl is now 37 years old. So that was a long time ago. But I found a good church, where they would pray for you at the end of the service. And I began to work on my stuff through a lot of different ways, healing prayer, taking classes. Came out to Virginia to use a lab that was doing a very specialized technique at the time with my little daughter, who was 2 when we moved and 3.5 when we moved back. And during that time, started going to Church of the Apostles, where we are still members. And I met my husband through the singles group. And we have the interesting story that we married without ever having gone on a date.
Wow.
But it was just it was odd circumstances. I was a single mom. I was moving back to California. I was done with dating, or men in general. And we decided, we really felt like the Lord was calling us to fast. So we fasted every Wednesday to ask the Lord whether we should get married. It was pretty scary to me, to be honest. And every Wednesday I would feel really reassured that the Lord was in this. And then Thursday I would start thinking, this is pretty crazy. And then as the days went on, I would think, I'm not going to do this. And then Wednesday would roll around and I would fast. And eventually the Lord said to me, if he proposes, you should say yes. And if he doesn't, you should let it go. And I wasn't that emotionally invested, because at this point I was in California and he was in Virginia. And we'd always just been super close friends, but there'd been absolutely no romance, never had a date. So he came out that Christmas to my parents' house and proposed. And we got married a month later.
Wow.
Don't recommend this to anyone. Wow. but we knew God was calling us. So we got married, and it was a real challenge at first for the two of us to come together. And we just were really committed to the Lord, believing we were called, and we were just getting a lot of healing prayer because we were pretty unhappy. And it was a real challenge. I mean, my daughter was almost 4 and he adopted her. And here we are, what is it, honey, 35 years later. God's done amazing things in our lives. And I think I don't want anyone to have to go through what I went through alone.
And obviously that shows in the goal of the Healing Center National, as I read, obviously you could state the goal a lot better, but to make joyful relationships in Christ a reality. And so can you share sort of how that came about? Because we all the time, and I didn't get this from, I think I got it from Pat and Jim Banks, who are my mentors in healing, and we interviewed them a few sessions ago. Well, not a few sessions ago, about a year ago, but and that was their whole goal, was creating community, a healing community in our church in North Carolina, where we were ministering to one another while learning skills. And it sounds like that's what you're building, but for people who don't have community around them, or for people who are hearing this, well, what am I supposed to do? I'm out here alone. I don't have community. What does that even look like? Can you share what that even means, and how give some hope to people who have no community and they don't even know what you're really talking about?
Well, we have people contact us all the time who say that they have no community and they want to have community. And we tell them to just start small and know that it will take time. We almost always recommend people start with the forming module. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I think it's really well put together to the point where someone can run the class without knowing much at all. Like if they can teach a Sunday school class, they can run forming. So we'll typically suggest that they just start with a small group of people and run forming, which teaches you how to have a conversational prayer life and helps you understand that the point of the Christian life is forming a relationship. It's not about performance. It's not about rowing. It's about aligning your sail with the wind of the Holy Spirit and letting the Holy Spirit blow you. So we will get people who get started with just a single class, and then we just keep feeding them other things. So some of the things that I think are really fundamental and basic would be forming, which is a 12-week class, which teaches you a bunch of exercises that you can then start doing on a daily basis. Like it teaches you appreciation, Lectio Divina, that kind of thing. And then we really like this listening class that we teach from Equipping Ministries International, because it not only teaches you how to listen well, but it also teaches you about problem ownership, and it touches a little bit on codependency, teaches you how to say no gracefully. So we feel like that's really important for people to understand that their role in the relationship is to come alongside someone and be a fellow traveler and not fix them. That's so crucial. Like trying to fix people, there's a few things that are deadly to community. One is if people can't keep a confidence, if they go on and overwhelm people, and if they try to always fix other people. It's so tempting to want to fix other people. So we feel like the listening class kind of gives you, this is what you can say. And if you learn to listen well, it's amazing how much community forms, because you finally feel like somebody gets you and understands you, and that you're able to reflect back what you're hearing. The person says, that's it. That's like a wonderful moment for me when I'm listening to someone and they say to me, that's it. And I'm like, yes, we got it. Because what they're saying is, you got me, you heard me, you understood me. And then the other thing, so the third thing would be the Emmanuel method, because we feel like the Emmanuel method is easy to learn. Like Carl Lehman says, you can learn it in, I think he says 15 minutes. You can learn the basics, and then you can learn more and more a whole lifetime. So if you have those three things going, those three things we feel are a good foundation for a community. So people will start with maybe 3 or 4 people, and then they'll be telling other friends about it. And pretty soon, so the idea is you start by teaching classes to the same group of people, and then we have a lot more classes. Like we've developed a lot of material that we can recommend. We kind of have an order that we go in that's a little different than what other people do, based on how intense is it, how difficult might it be for people who don't have a lot of capacity. Like we teach restarting, which we love, but it's about addiction and attachment, and we find it quite overwhelming. So we teach that at the very end of a long line of classes. And the idea being that not everyone will stay in your class, but a lot of people will, and you'll end up with a core group. And as that core group begins to mature and develop the skills, then they become magnetic and they draw other people. And pretty soon, we now have another healing center in another location. So that's sort of the model of how we grow. Yeah. So people often say, like, we can't do this. And we're like, you can do more than you think. We'll come alongside you. You can join our leadership network. You can start coming to leadership development. And we will, there's a lot of leaders out there who are like waiting for someone to give them permission to move forward and willing to help them get started. Yeah. So we always say, despise not small beginnings, and you just start small and you just keep working along.
Yeah, that's good. And, raising up, like Kathy said, we're raising up an army of heart healers with healed hearts. And you're right, a lot of people are like, I can't do this. But it doesn't take, and I don't mean to be facetious, it doesn't take a PhD to help someone get their heart healed. And but I want to just go back a little bit to the question I kind of posed before you shared, which I know, Betsy, there's a lot more to your story. Mm-hmm. And if we had 6 hours and it was a 6-part miniseries with Betsy, we could dive deeper. But and I know it'd be fascinating. But just from your experience, as a healer, as a teacher, as a leader, and as one who's received healing yourself and are still receiving healing, because we all are in that process, what are some myths that people believe about healing that you've seen? Just, kind of roadblocks.
Well, that's such a good question. I think there's a lot of roadblocks. I think some of them would be sadness. I think your average American is carrying a lot of unrecognized grief. And our culture is not very supportive of people fully processing their grief, which is why, I did Facing Life's Losses. I heard during your Jerry Sitzer interview, you kept asking, how do you process your losses? So this is, every week you start with some form of appreciation exercise. It's going to help you get your relational circuits on so that you're actually able to interact with God and people. And then there's some teaching, and then there's an exercise, and then you're always closing by connecting to a manual. So I think sadness is actually a big block. I think if you have unprocessed grief, it is a huge roadblock to intimacy with God and other people. Because why would you want to get close to someone? You might lose them. How could you possibly trust God if He let me go through that? And when I think about it, it's still unbelievably painful. Or it's blocked my life in some subconscious way and I can't go forward. I think most people don't realize what it would actually be like to have fully processed their losses. And then when you have one, you only have to deal with that one instead of this entire train of cars that you're pulling. The recent loss is the locomotive, but you got a lot of momentum going there. And we avoid it because the idea of engaging it is huge. I think there's a huge problem of self-hatred. I mean, it's so rampant, so much more than I thought. And this was something I learned from Forming. He has a chapter on self-hatred, but since then I've done more reading, and I've noticed in my own ministry to other people, so many people do not see themselves as the beloved, received child of God in whom He delights, who He's always with, who He has wonderful plans for. And they actually think it's a virtue to denigrate themselves in some way. So I think that really interferes with us coming to God. And then, of course, I think you all had Father Andrew speak, with HeartSync, our guardians are on high alert and they're not going to let anything in. And then, of course, your attachment style. Attachment style is a big hindrance because if you don't have a secure attachment, then your expectation is that no one really cares. No one really wants to interact with me. Or no matter how strident I am about what I need, no one really gets it or hears me. So my attachment style was massively insecure when I married my husband, and it's still about maybe 75% secure now. And then the other, I have all three insecure styles, and the other quarter wedge, I've disorganized, distracted, and dismissive. It's just the battle scars of a very dysfunctional childhood. So your attachment style can really cause a lot of harm, because, a dismissive attachment, that's the kid that no one really attuned to me. And so I decided relationships were not safe. And I was the little boy who played with his train in the corner, and mom bragged to all her bridge friends, he never gives me any trouble, but he inside is still upset. I mean, when they did the attachment studies, they were shocked that these kids seemed so self-contained, at the age of 2 or whatever it was. And then they put heart monitors on them, and they realized, oh no, their heart is actually racing when mom leaves the room. And it's just so tragic. And then the distracted is, I keep trying to get mom's attention, and it was sometimes there and sometimes not. And I know attachment feels good, so I'm always looking for it. And it's never enough. It never feels like enough. So all of those things can really make it hard to receive. I mean, really, to be healed, we have to be able to quiet and to receive what God has for us. And I think we have a lot of barriers to receiving. I don't know if that was what you were looking for.
I kind of asked you 2 questions, Betsy, to be honest. I was like, when I said myths and then roadblocks, I was like, that's a totally different question. And so that was wonderful, because that really does explain or help people understand, maybe I'm not getting the breakthrough that I wish I was or that I'm expecting, because there's other things that we actually need to remove. And we've talked about this a lot, that healing is not just a one and done thing. Like, okay, we're having this wonderful session. Why am I still struggling with anxiety, or my relationships are still all messed up? And it's a process of walking it out. Have you come across people that when you share what you're doing and what Healing Center and international Christians, I mean, and they just say, well, we don't need that. It was all bought at the cross. Why, they don't see the reason. People that don't see the need for this.
Oh, yeah. I think lots of people don't see the need. I mean, yeah, they don't. I don't know what to say about that. I really felt like early on the Lord told me to walk through the open door. Mm. And I'm still doing that, because I feel like there's so many people who are in need. And I feel like the ones who don't see the need, I don't really see it. It's my job to convince them. Otherwise, I think I have a view of evangelism. I don't know if anyone else thinks this way, but I feel like it's my job to love people and to be relational with them and to share with them what's going on in my life. And my experience has been that eventually they will go through a life crisis. And if you have loved them well and have been there for them, you're the one they'll come to. Yeah. And so that's my goal. I want to be the one they come to. Yeah. And that happened with my dad, who was so cruel to me. And yet, toward the end of his life, the Lord told me a series of things. First, he told me to start calling him. And I was just like, oh man, I so much do not want to do that. I mean, I would call, and if he answered, we'd say a few, kind of chummy words, all very fake. And then he'd hand the phone to my mom. But I actually started calling him and having conversations with him. And they were not always nice, because sometimes he would fly off the handle and get nasty. But I started doing that. And then he told me to give him a surprise birthday party. My father never let us celebrate his birthday. So this truly seemed like an utterly crazy idea. But I planned the whole party and got my brothers and sisters to come out. And he was a Christian Scientist. And I went to his church with him that morning because the Lord told me to. The night before, I mean, this was literally, we're walking it out one step at a time. And he was so touched when I went to his church. And then I basically told him, I've been lying to you, which in my family, you never lie about anything. I told him I'd been lying to you, and I said, I'm here because it's your birthday. He was in California. We were in Virginia. And I had told him I was coming out to take my daughter to Disneyland. That was what I told him. And then I was like, no, we're actually here for your 80th birthday. And he loved his birthday party. He was like a little kid. I saw a side of him I'd never seen before. And there was just like a series of things where I just kept sharing things with him. And I had totally, years of arguing with him theologically, all completely out the window. This was the healed or more healed Betsy who just was loving him. And I just kept loving him. He ended up in a Christian Science nursing home, which he wanted to go into and then utterly hated it and said it was like a prison. And the Lord had told me the night before to go back out there. And I had just been there, but I flew back out. And when I was in the air, he decided he wanted out. And he said, they're not going to let me out. They're getting a lot of money from me. And, me being me, when I heard that, I said, oh, yeah? Oh, yeah? I told them I was taking him out to lunch and borrowed their wheelchair and then planted him at In-N-Out Burgers with my 17-year-old daughter, took the wheelchair back and got all of his stuff. And they were so hostile about the fact that, so he's not coming back. But, he started saying to me, like, why are you being so nice to me?
Mm. Wow.
And my father came to the Lord.
Wow.
On a Monday evening and died on a Thursday morning.
Oh, wow.
So that's my view with anybody, Christian or non-Christian. You just let them be who they are and you just love them.
Betsy, could you have done that if you had not gone through your own heart healing?
No, because I hated my dad. Yeah. I really did. And I saw him as the source of all of my suffering. Mm. And no, absolutely not. I think, and see, I'm still very, very much in process. I'm still getting sessions, and you saw me with Carl Lehman working through painful stuff. I still have painful stuff. But no, absolutely not. And I would have felt like I had to argue with him, but I didn't argue with him anymore. I just learned to just love him and be genuine with him. Like at one point when he could hardly walk, he'd like hold on to the furniture. We kind of met in a doorway, and he was a really good dancer, and he kind of held out his hands like, let's dance. And I kind of jokingly acted like I was going to dance with him. And then he said to me, really sadly, he said, my dancing days are over. The last time I tried to dance, I started to fall and I nearly knocked your sister over. And he said, I can't dance. And he looked so sad. And what just came out of me without thinking, I said, oh, but Dad, they'll be dancing in heaven. And then I thought, oh, what have I said? Well, before this trip out to LA, I made 7 trips in about 10 months. Before this trip, the Lord had said to me, tell your dad it's not too late. He thinks he's made his decision and now it's too late. And I said, tried to talk my mom into saying it to him, and she was like, no way. But I had said to God, if you want me to say that, give me the moment. And that was the moment. I said, they'll be dancing in heaven. Then I said, oh, never mind. And then I say, well, wait a minute, Dad, maybe you'll come to the end of yourself and cry out to God and you will go to heaven. And I said, Dad, it's not too late. But it was the way I said it. I said it with like a lot of love and excitement, like, hey, maybe, there's still a chance. You'll cry out to God and you'll get to come to heaven and they'll be dancing. Won't that be exciting? And he just got so, the old Betsy would have been so terrified to say anything like that because it might have set him off. But the more healed Betsy was just like excited at the possibility and full of joy and hope. And he got this look on his face like, wow, I never thought of that. And then we just kind of smiled and he went his way and my way. Wow. See, it's not my job to save anybody or to fix anybody.
So there's definitely, I'm saying this tongue in cheek, obviously, but there's definitely some benefits to getting a healed heart, right? I mean, I know.
Yeah.
And so we can see, even though it's a journey and it's a lifelong process, I believe, we can see transformation in our lives. And it's not the one and done, but it's the transformational process. And just one more question, Betsy, and then we'll wrap up. But what's your thought on, and this is for just people who are maybe just getting started, but what's your thought on, getting to a place, can we ever get to a place where we don't need heart healing anymore?
No. But, I go through really long periods of time where I'm very joyful, very satisfied. We practice these spiritual exercises we've learned from various people every day. We're reading scripture, we're listening to God, we're doing Emmanuel. So this has become a natural part of life, asking my husband at dinner, what was satisfying for you today? So this has all become part of life. And I would say that we have a really joyful life. And my youngest daughter, who's in medical school now, actually really touched my heart recently. She came and visited us by climbing up a ladder onto the deck, since we're not having anyone in the house. And she said to me, we have the healthiest family I know. And I was really surprised to hear that. And I said, oh my goodness, with all of our flaws. She said, no, really, Mom, I'm around so many of my friends' families. We have the healthiest family we know. So there's a lot of joy. There's a real sense that when we're going through a struggle, we know what to do. We know how to engage with God and walk through it. And, when Sam was sick, really sick, and we thought he might die, I every night was doing a manual journaling, and I wrote a little book about it called Whispers in the Storm, that's helping a lot of people get through hard times. But you want to keep getting healing because there's more. And what happened when Carl Lehman worked with me is I got so triggered by my husband's pneumocystic pneumonia and him being in ICU. And really, to be honest, all of us got triggered. We were all being a little nasty to each other, which I think is pretty normal. But then Carl came into town and he decided to work with me. And it was in front of everybody, which was really hard for me, but I just had to tune it out and receive. And what the Lord told me was that the size of the trigger had to be the same size as the depth of the wound to get at that wound. We got to a really deep wound. And so I had a huge trigger, and then I had a huge healing. And ultimately, you want to live your life where you're always turning to God with everything, because he always has a gift for you in your struggles. And it's all meant to be good and to be redemptive. And when you get healing, you just find out that you're more and more free. You're more and more, there's way more freedom. There's way more joy. There's way more love than you could ever imagine. And so, no, it's never over, because the good stuff is never over either, but the hard stuff. And of course, the pandemic, my goodness.
Yeah. It's brought out the best and the worst.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was a great commercial for heart healing, Betsy. I know that you weren't intending to do that, but I was like, that was great. That could be like a bumper sticker, because, just the joy that I'm hearing from you and seeing on your face in the midst of even pain. And that's the beauty of heart healing. It's like we can find the joy even in the pain. And it's not just digging for more pain. It's actually digging. We get to experience more joy. We get to experience deeper intimacy. So, and I think that can be really the way that we talk about healing, is that it's not about let's dig up your deepest pain so you can sit in it and feel terrible. It's, we get to look at the pain, but in that there's even more joy and everything that comes with healing. So thank you for sharing that, Betsy. I do want to just give a little bit commercial for your book, Facing Life's Losses Participant Workbook. Thank you for sending it to us. It looks phenomenal, chock full of just awesome value and content and gold here. Can you just talk a little bit about that, people that are interested in getting your book and where they can get it?
Yeah, I think what makes pain hard is when you stay stuck in it. You do not want to stay stuck in your pain. You want to familiarize yourself with ways to process pain so that you don't stay stuck. that's, you want to learn how to get out of it. So basically, it's a whole bunch of exercises, starting with, recognizing what is grief. Most people don't recognize that they're in grief. What kinds of things what losses have I experienced? What kinds of things do I need to process? And then what's that feel like for me? And then we have you make a grief timeline where you're looking at your losses. And amazingly enough, often a lot of losses will happen at once, and often joys and losses will happen around the same time. And we're teaching you all the time, how to quiet and how to process. And so a lot of people don't really understand the whole concept of processing, but the idea is that everything comes into the attachment center of your brain, and your brain says, does this matter to me? Is this about a cat in Ohio, or is this about my own mother? Do I need to pay attention to this? Then you're up in the amygdala, and level 2 from the life model people, is this good, bad, or scary? Do I want to move toward it? Do I want to run away? Am I going to freeze? Am I overwhelmed? And then your cingulate cortex, what am I feeling? Am I alone with this? Are there other people? And then your prefrontal cortex, what's it like me to do in this situation? Then finally over to your left brain. So many of us have gotten stuck at some level, and we've never fully processed our experiences. And it's a little bit like eating food and having a blockage in your gut somewhere. It feels absolutely horrible. So we really do need to process what we're going through. And what I've tried to do is put together a series of exercises that will help you be aware of what you need to do, and then actually give you the tools to process it. So typically people go through the class, and when they do the grief timeline, they choose one loss that they're going to do all the rest of the exercises on. So exercises on forgiveness and regrets, and there's all kinds of things in there to help you process. But I've heard of many people who then go back over and over again. They'll get a little group of 3 and they'll just go back over and over again. And the goal is to process all your losses, and you have no idea what that would feel like. It's like we're all carrying a backpack full of rocks, and we've just gotten so accustomed to it, we don't even know it's there. And you're taking the rocks out, and it's a whole new world.
Yeah, that's so true what you just said. So many people are carrying it around and they don't even realize it. I think a lot of people become accustomed to dysfunction. They become accustomed to pain. They become accustomed to that self-hatred place. They just get used to it because it's their normal. But when you can present someone with the possibilities and the hope that it doesn't have to always be that way, and perhaps even reflect back to them that what they're experiencing as normal to them isn't normal at all. I know in my own story, I had somebody do that to me where I was sharing an adverse childhood experience with a friend, and she looked at me and she said, Kathy, that's not normal. You realize that that's not normal, and that's not okay that that happened to you. And for me, it was just my norm. I didn't know that it wasn't normal. So I think that's part of what happens is we get into our own, we compare ourselves to ourselves, and so it's normal. But then when you realize, oh, this is not actually the way it's meant to be, and oh, there actually is an alternative, and it's like, oh, then you start looking at it differently. So that's what you said about, carrying that backpack of rocks. It's exactly what people do, and they don't even realize what healthy looks like because they've never known anything different but unhealthy.
And now I think I write a lot about this because it really grieves me the way children are treated in our culture, just not given the nurture and support and empathy that they need. And the adverse childhood experiences, when I first learned about it, I was expecting me to have a pretty high score, but my view is that my husband's family was pretty healthy. But then he took it and he got the same score I did.
Wow.
And we just weren't recognizing that these things. But one of his earliest memories when he was a little tiny boy, his grandmother lived across the street, was seeing his Uncle Fance, who was an alcoholic, chase his grandmother around the house with a big knife. And he was just frozen. He couldn't cry for help or do anything. He was just so terrified. And his grandmother, fortunately, was a fast runner and got away. But, when you go through those questions, have you ever seen someone, hit or whatever, all those different questions that they have, it's like, wow, all of a sudden you realize, oh yeah, I have seen that. Oh yeah, I remember the time this happened. And then you start realizing, wow.
Yeah.
had a lot of trauma that I didn't even recognize.
I love these conversations, Betsy, and I know we could pick your brain for a long more time, but we do want to wrap it up just with a thank you. And if people want to find more about Healing Center International, where should they go?
We have a pretty robust website at God Heals Today.
Okay.
Because we're doing a lot of different things, a lot of things I haven't mentioned. Okay. So yeah, I would say explore the website. There's ways to contact us there.
GodHealsToday.org.
No, it is at, yes, GodHealsToday.org. I'm sorry.
We'll put it on there. We always include the resources. So thank you so much, Betsy, for your time. We really appreciate it so much. It's been valuable and rich and deep, and I'm sure people will just really have just an incredible time listening to some of your story. And so go check out God Heals Today, and we'll put that in the
show notes,
on the show notes too. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for saying yes to the Isaiah 61 mandate too. I mean, that's the commonality that we share. We've said yes to joining in the commission with Jesus to heal the brokenhearted and set captives free. So thank you for the investment of your life into this as well. Really.
Thank you. And thank you guys for having me. This was really fun.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation as much as we did. And really, Betsy is just a delight and really just has said yes to the Isaiah 61 mandate to heal the brokenhearted and set captives free. And the work that they are doing is really quite more broad even than what she discussed in here. So we'd really encourage you to go to GodHealsToday.org and get more information about what they're doing and check out the resources, and perhaps you guys will glean some gold from there. I know you will. If you go diving for it, you're going to find it.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming along, and we'll look forward to seeing you, or at least hearing from you, or connecting you with you in some way soon. Bless you guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Face to Face Ministries podcast. And to be sure not to miss any future episodes, please subscribe.
And to help us get the word out, please share this podcast with your friends. Give us a 5-star rating and leave us a brief review. More content is coming your way.
Thank you so much for listening.